Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. I'm Tim Verghese, as always. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We have a lot to get to today. Nebraska, not exactly, or just wrapped up in the transfer portal, I guess. We maybe a couple weeks ago kind of did our referendum on Nebraska's efforts in the winter portal window. Turns out they weren't done. They went out and after a bit of a roller coaster recruitment, went out and landed Notre Dame guard Rocco Spindler, a grad transfer out of Notre Dame, who started over 20 games for the Fighting Irish over the last few seasons, has played over 1,000 snaps, has led up only two career sacks in his career, in that many snaps played. Um, and gives Nebraska a little versatility and a little freedom along the interior of the line to move some pieces around. Um, you know, Justin Evans competing for that center job. Now they have the opportunity to kind of make that move, potentially, and feel comfortable there. Henry Lutovsky's going to be missing some time coming off the surgery. This gives them a little, kind of breathing room as well with some of the injuries in the offensive line room. It's a big deal, and again, I think Nebraska recognized the need, which is why they were as aggressive as they were. The numbers out there. Nebraska, kind of had to outbid Virginia essentially at the end of that. At one point, it felt like it was a Michigan and Indiana recruitment. Nebraska got involved, made a pretty competitive offer and a competitive pitch when he was on campus last weekend. And then he went on campus to Pitt. He went to Virginia, and Virginia weirdly emerged as a favorite there for a bit, just because of their aggressiveness from an NIL standpoint. But ultimately, Nebraska countered and was able to get him on campus. It's a bit of an aggressive move, just how much Nebraska's invested financially in the offensive line. Spindler's a proven veteran, someone that gives you quality snaps along the interior. But you did take a gamble. Nebraska did take a gamble with Alabama transfer offensive tackle Elijah Pritchett, and I don't necessarily know that they're done. I could see them in the spring if the right name emerges, getting back into the offensive line market, going after another offensive line target. If the right name is in the portal. So we'll see what happens. I mean, again, they've got some injuries to work through in the spring, on the line, as Matt Rule kind of touched on in his press conference over the weekend. So the addition of Spindler, I think, a very good thing, a bit of a surprise, of course. If you've been following our coverage over there, Nebraska did feel confident, but as the week kind of wore on and as they continued to make other visits, it kind of felt like things were getting away from Nebraska, but they managed to win out and now have Spindler on campus. Again, impressive win, but all things considered, I also think a bit of a gamble just in terms of how much they've invested along the offensive line. I kind of need this to work out considering how much from a roster standpoint, how much you've invested in that position. The other big news, of course, Nebraska had their Elite Junior Day over the weekend. We've got intel running over at InsideNebraska.com. When you're watching this video later today, we'll have Tuesday Tidbits with some lasting intel, and some additional, kind of notes coming out of the weekend, along with some other recruiting notes. So be sure to read those because I don't touch on everything here that I touch on there. Obviously that is paid, that's kind of insider intel. It's subscription. So who would I be if I was giving all of our intel away, kind of for free on YouTube? So be sure to check that out. Be sure to subscribe to InsideNebraska.com for our insider recruiting info on top 26 targets. Obviously, we had the Spindler recruitment kind of covered over at the Insiders Board and InsideNebraska.com. So for all the latest updates on Nebraska recruiting, be sure to subscribe to InsideNebraska.com because I don't just post here. I post over there more frequently. So anyway, on that note, kind of just touching on some highlights from the weekend. Nebraska got Jordan Campbell, the four-star linebacker out of Miami Carroll City in town. Miami commit, one of two flip targets that were in town. You kind of get the indication just from the way the staff recruits him, how many members are recruiting Campbell, and the way Campbell talks about Nebraska's pursuit. You get the indication that he's somewhat of a kind of a building block on the defense. They kind of see him as one of a few 26 targets that they feel they can build around. on the defensive side of the ball. And I think, coming out of the weekend, Nebraska's kind of emerged as the biggest threat to Miami. Miami's held on to his commitment since November 2023. He's a long time Hurricanes commit, wants to stay closer to home, where that's, obviously why he made that early pledge is the opportunity to stay in his hometown and put on for the hometown Hurricanes is something that's intriguing to him. But, he's already stated he plans to make official visits to Nebraska and Oregon. Georgia recently entered the mix. Florida State's in the mix now. There's a couple schools that want to get him on campus. Want to try and flip them away. I think Nebraska's well positioned to potentially do that, but they have to understand, and I think Nebraska staff does understand that this is not something you can win in the spring. It's not a recruitment. It's something you're going to have to kind of stick in, kind of hunker down, and kind of strap in for, kind of a competitive recruitment for a couple of weeks, if not months. This is going to be one of the months. Sorry, not even weeks, but it's definitely going to be a recruitment that lasts, some months because you're going to have to, at this point, he stated he wants to get back to Nebraska for an official visit either later this spring or early in the summer. I think Nebraska's going to want to get him on campus again for an unofficial visit in March. If they can, once spring ball gets going, they'll want to bring him up for spring practice, and it's that way for a couple guys. We're in a dead period now as we're speaking, for the month of Feb. But once the March, once visits kick off again in March, Nebraska's going to want to get a lot of guys they had in town for Junior Day back in town. Next month for spring practices. They want these guys to witness what practice looks like, what it's like to be coached by guys on staff, especially with so many new faces on the coaching staffs, Nikhil Shorts on the wide receivers, Addison Williams in the secondary, Terry Braden with the defensive line, Philip Simpson's, with the edge rushers and outside linebackers. It's a big deal for Nebraska, and it's a priority for Nebraska to kind of showcase to these top 26 targets what it's like to be coached by these guys. So Nebraska's going to want to get Campbell on campus at least two more times. And they kind of understand as well that they probably have to get him on campus again in the fall for a game day to kind of showcase that environment to really have a shot. I think this is going to be a recruitment that's going to go till the fall. I don't think he's going to make a final decision or make any type of flip, until at least the fall. So, like I said, Nebraska's gonna have to be prepared to kind of strap in here and prepare for the long haul. I think Rob Dvorak, linebackers coach, has done a really good job of building a board. But he's kind of built such a strong board he can afford to kind of go after a Campbell and take a swing. On one of the top linebackers in the country and really, kind of put his best foot forward there because of the type of talent that he is because of what he would mean, what his addition would kind of mean for Nebraska's defense. He can kind of afford to kind of take these swings, knowing he's got, in-state linebacker Jace Reynolds, a guy that's, right down the road that was back on campus this weekend. He's got a very good chance at landing Jace Reynolds. He's got a very good chance of landing Kason Thomas, three-star linebacker out of Sioux City, Bishop Heelan, who was also in town this weekend. Nebraska's also in the mix for four-star linebacker Keaton Harris. He wasn't able to make it into town this weekend, but that's another top priority for them. So Dvorak has a pretty nice board set up where, hey, with they can make a run at Jordan Campbell. If it happens, Nebraska's all the better for it. If not, they've got a pretty nice board behind them. It's not like they're selling out for this guy necessarily, even though they are, kind of investing a lot of resources from early on at this point in his recruitment. Another top target on the defensive side of the ball in town, Mikhail Blade, four-star edge rusher out of Chicago. His first time on campus. Nebraska's quietly been in the mix for a couple months now. I think EJ Bartello in particular has done a really good job there. Matt Rule doing some work there as well. I think Nebraska's kind of come out of the weekend as a top contender there. They're battling Michigan, they're battling Notre Dame, Illinois, USC, a couple others. But Nebraska's quietly done some good work there. And after getting him on campus, they're going to want to get him back on campus, like I said, in the spring. And then for an official visit, I think they're on track at this point to get him in town for an official visit. That's a pretty big deal. And you have to feel good. 6'5", 230-pound edge rusher. I think Nebraska is going to be able to showcase what they're looking for in a guy like that. With a Deshaun McCullough, who Matt Rule stated they plan to play off the edge, and they have an opportunity here to kind of showcase a couple guys on the roster and be like, hey, Mikhail Blade, this is what you could look like in our scheme. This is kind of from a body type standpoint and from a physical standpoint. This is kind of the comparisons they're making. So intrigued to see what happens there. You get another one, I'll say this before we get any further into the weekend. I'm not expecting any imminent decisions coming out of the weekend. We could see one or two potentially here in the coming days, but I'm not expecting anything imminent. Just because at this point in the cycle, with a lot of these 26 targets, they want to go through the process. They want to make official visits, in April or May. Or even June, those type of months. They want to potentially see games in the fall. I think again, like it was last cycle, you're going to see a lot of decisions closer to the summer, likely through the summer. Where Nebraska, again, like I've mentioned, kind of the goal is to enter the football season with most of your class intact. But it's going to be a kind of a slow process this spring of adding, slowly but surely adding guys, to the class and trying to get closer and closer to that 10 mark. And then, by the end of the summer, trying to get closer to that 15 or 20 mark in terms of members of the class. So we'll see what happens. Like I said, Blade is another a guy worth mentioning just because it was his first time in town. And Nebraska's well positioned there to get him back on campus and maintain, kind of some staying power with him. Another guy that's already planning to return for an official visit, Florida commit Devin Jackson, the other four-star flip target in town. Jackson led his Orlando First Academy team in tackles last season, and super talented defensive back that can play corner or safety. Nebraska likes him at corner, but understands he can play some safety and would like to kind of showcase his versatility. And obviously Nebraska does a good job rotating in the secondary. They want to showcase his versatility and have him rotate across the secondary. He's already planning a few visits, official visits for the summer, and Nebraska's already in line to get one after a strong visit. He actually spent him and his teammate Danny Odom, three-star athlete Nebraska's recruiting in the secondary as well. Those guys arrived in town on Friday and stayed through Monday. Nebraska didn't got a multi-day visit out of those guys, had him on campus 2 days in a row. We're kind of able to showcase a lot of different things. So even though this was the first time Jackson and Odom got on campus, they got kind of a full experience, and both already have plans to return. Those guys have been long recruited by Addison Williams, who before getting to Nebraska was the defensive coordinator at UCF down in Orlando. So he's very familiar with these two guys. Getting them on campus, obviously, it was good for them to see a familiar face in Williams. And I get the indications Nebraska's got, kind of an opportunity to stick around in both recruitments. I think they're the favorites at this point to land Odom, and I think they're well positioned to potentially flip Jackson down the line. Again, this is another recruitment. I think they're going to have to kind of hunker down for, specifically with Jackson. There's a bunch of schools trying to flip Jackson away right now. He mentioned 4 or 5 schools he may want to take official visits to. Some top programs in the SEC, top programs in the Big Ten, top programs in the ACC as well. So again, strap in here because I think Nebraska is gonna have to, kind of stick it out in that recruitment. Another guy I think Nebraska kind of emerged as the favorite for coming out of the weekend, four-star tight end Lincoln Watkins. He was a name I mentioned going into the weekend as one Nebraska had a really good chance to impress. Um, a quote that's kind of gone, kind of circulated a little bit that he said to me, and honestly, he mentioned this, I guess, anecdote to a couple of different people, but the quote he shared with me was just on being in town on Saturday and seeing 90 players kind of working out on their own, despite the fact that Nebraska's players had the day off. The fact that 90 players were in the facility getting a workout in or throwing on the field, or just being around the program, kind of spoke to the culture and spoke to kind of the culture that Matt Rule's building and kind of what's happening at Nebraska. And I think that more than anything, for guys that are true culture fits, guys that understand what Matt Rule's trying to build, guys that are fully bought into what Matt Rule's building, nothing is going to there's no better pitch than seeing guys in on their day, or the majority of the team in on their day off, getting a voluntary lift in, getting bonding together as a team, kind of working together towards a common goal. There's nothing NIL can do. There's nothing that even a compelling pitch or compelling conversation with Rule can do that can match. Just seeing that with your own eyes. So I really think coming out of the weekend, Nebraska's one of, if not the favorite to land Lincoln Watkins, four-star tight end out of Michigan, a dynamic pass catcher that can do a couple of different things. You kind of line him up as like an inline tight end, can line him out in the slot or even out wide potentially. He's kind of rapidly ascending up the board, and I think again after this weekend, Nebraska's in pretty good position there. So keep an eye on that recruitment. That's one that I don't think is going to wrap up necessarily anytime soon. But if Nebraska can get him back in town at least once or twice more this spring, I think they have a chance to kind of close this one before the summer. keep an eye on that one moving forward. Another recruitment I think they're in pretty good position for right now. Four-star cornerback Dominic Turnbull, another South Florida prospect, has Addison Williams recruiting him, has John Butler recruiting him, has Matt Rule recruiting him, made it to town for the first time. He's another one that spent multiple days on campus. He actually arrived on Thursday and stayed through Saturday and left Sunday morning, I believe. But spent multiple days on campus, had an opportunity to kind of see the campus for the first time. Feels like he'd be a good fit in Matt Rule's in John Butler's scheme. Addison Williams, a guy he's pretty familiar with from his time at UCF, pretty familiar with Nebraska, just because Butler's been recruiting him. Before him, Evan Cooper was recruiting him. Matt Rule's been a consistent in that recruitment for some time as well. He's aiming to make a spring decision, and right now, I think Nebraska's pretty well positioned there. Florida's a threat. Miami's a threat. I think UCF's in that mix as well, a couple other programs. But I like what Nebraska did this weekend with him. And I think right now, if you're going to call it, if he makes a decision this spring and he does follow through on that, I think you have to feel good about Nebraska's chances of landing him. On the offensive side of the ball, it was kind of just a get to know weekend. For on the offensive line, they had four-star offensive tackle Kelvin Obit out of Idaho. I hope I'm saying that right. I need to clarify with him how to say his last name, but I thought they did a good job with him. They had fast rising Chicago offensive tackle Claude and Puma in town, and a recent offer out to Rex Waterman, an offensive lineman out of Arizona. They had those three guys in the 26th class in town, and then 2027 in-state offensive tackle target Matt Erickson in town. I like where Nebraska stands with all of these guys. I think Obit and Puma have kind of risen way up the board, especially with Jackson Campbell kind of announcing his top schools, no longer including Nebraska in the mix. I think, more so than ever. I mean, I think Kelvin Obit's the number one offensive tackle on the offensive tackle target on the board at this point. I think Puma's right there at number two, if not one B. I think those two guys, like Donovan Raiola. Donovan Raiola loves both of those guys. He'd like to get both of them in town. Keith Williams doing good work with both these guys. EJ Bartell involved in Puma's recruitment as well. With Obit, it's just you're battling USC, you're battling Michigan, you're battling Oregon, a couple of these Big Ten powers. But Nebraska, I think, I've had him on campus twice. Same with Puma. You feel good about where they're at. I think they have some staying power there. I think they have some staying power with Puma as well. Ultimately, I think with Obit, you stand a better chance just because I think Puma's a guy that's going to start to see a lot more SEC attention. I think he's a guy that's going to drive a pretty high NIL valuation. I think he's going to end up being a recruitment that ends up in a bidding war, just because of the type of prospect that he is. Nebraska loves Obit, and I think they can get him. And I think obviously you're going to have to spend some NIL resources there, but I think that's one that's a little more attainable for the Huskers at this point compared to Puma. But I don't think they're going away in either recruitment. Waterman's more of an internal guy at this point, just based on his frame. But he's another guy that I think the staff really likes. I think they're higher on than the consensus. I think they're higher on him than most programs are. They feel good about kind of where they sit there too. But this was more of a feel out visit for him. They're planning on potentially getting him back for an official visit. I think the spring for Donovan Raiola is about setting up a board. Obit and Puma right at the top. Where does Waterman kind of fit in? They made a couple new offers on the offensive line this last month. Where do some of those guys fit in? So these next few weeks and months are about getting certain guys in town, making sure, kind of doing their due diligence. I think Waterman, this was a feel out visit for both sides, not just Nebraska, but for not just for Waterman, but for Nebraska as well. Kind of figure out kind of where he fits, how would he fit into the program. And I kind of get the indication coming out of the week. I think Nebraska's still feeling it out. They want to see other guys on the line. They want to see other prospects, visit with other prospects, and see what happens there. So the offensive line board is something that I think Donovan Raiola, I think the pressure's on. Just with some of the misses he's had. Obviously Cantwell's a tough one to swallow. They've taken some big swings and they've had some misses, had some good lands. Obviously Pritchett is a big deal. Landing Rocco Spindler is a big deal. Flipping Julian Marks is a big deal. All those things are good, but it's the pressure's kind of on from both an on-field development standpoint, and a production standpoint, but also on the recruiting side of things, for Donovan Raiola. So he's cast a wide net and he's got Nebraska in the mix for some top offensive linemen, but he has to land him at some point. So we'll see what happens there. Another one, just kind of we're in wait and see mode. I thought, elsewhere on the offensive side of the ball, I thought Nebraska did a good job bringing in some pass catchers. Got four-star wide receiver Jabari Brady out of Coconut Creek. Monarch in town. That was a visit we hadn't reported going into the weekend, but he did in fact make it into town. Top 100 pass catcher, one of the better outside receivers in the 2026 class. They also had Ryan Mosley, a fast rising receiver out of Carrollton, in town. And one thing you have to kind of be impressed with so far is kind of Da'Keil Shorts and Jamar Mosey. They're just kind of their resilience. Both of those guys are like, Jabari Brady, for example, has Florida heavily in the mix, has Miami in the mix, has Ohio State in the mix, LSU, Oklahoma, and kind of some power programs really after him. And those guys have been involved in that recruitment for some time, especially compared to when Nebraska got involved. That didn't stop Nebraska from trying to get him on campus and getting him on campus. Ryan Mosley, South Carolina is a favorite there. Georgia is really confident about keeping him in state. Florida's in the mix. LSU's in the mix. Oklahoma's in the mix. So Nebraska's battling some top programs, but it's not really scaring away Da'Keil Shorts, even though he just got on staff, even though he's kind of turning things around and trying to get these guys to Nebraska for the first time when they have, established contact and an established relationships at places like Georgia and Florida and South Carolina. Um, Shorts and the staff are doing a really good job of staying aggressive, keeping Nebraska in the midst for some top pass catchers, specifically outside receivers, something they kind of struggled to land under previous guys that under Matt Rule previously. So again, do I think they'll land both of these guys? Probably not. Honestly, I think if you put it right now, I think you feel better about their chances with Mosley than Brady at this point. But the fact they got both on campus is a big deal. Sounds like Mosley's already planning to return for an official visit and may even come back in the spring for another unofficial visit. They're working to get Brady back in town, but that's just going to be one of those things that's a work in progress. They also like his teammate, his name's Jabori, Jaborree, so it's spelled differently. Jabari Reagans also plays at Coconut Creek Monarch. Nebraska likes him too. He's another outside receiver, 6'4", that can go up and get it. I think you're going to see some new wide receivers pop up and continue to pop up on campus through the spring. I think Shorts and Mosey have done a really good job of getting Nebraska in the heads of some top receivers across the country. Who, again, will they land all of them? Probably not. We're going to have to kind of see. I think this board is going to evolve. Offensive line, wide receiver, and DB. I'll say this right now. I think the board at those three positions are going to evolve over the next few weeks and into the summer. I think you're going to start to see more of a concrete idea of who the top targets are, who the names to really know are, and kind of who else is just guys they got on campus, felt it out, decided to move in different directions. I think that hierarchy is going to start to figure itself out closer to the summer. But the spring is I think you're going to see some names in town that you aren't expecting. You're going to see Nebraska, like, oh, wow, Nebraska got into that recruitment. How serious is Nebraska in that recruitment? Some guys, like there's a chance Jabari Brady made it up to town this weekend. There's a chance he never comes back to Nebraska, and Nebraska never really gets him on, never really gets any real momentum going with him again. Or there's a chance Nebraska kind of emerges in the next few weeks as the favorite. I think that's just kind of where they're at this point. As they're figuring out the board, as these guys get a feel for what Nebraska is, it's part of the new staff. Kind of when you turn over staff and you have some changes, is this kind of weird feel out period. So Nebraska's going to move quick, and you have to commend them for that. But just the fact that these guys are getting on campus, I think, speaks to the ability of Mosey and Shorts as recruiters. On that note, that'll probably do it for us here. Kind of appreciate y'all tuning in. Check out our work over at InsideNebraska.com. We've got more intel over there, just from the weekend, and we'll have more just on some top 26 targets. It's a big feel out period for Nebraska, so stay tuned for all of that, and we'll be back next week.